Mental health educator and author Ganel-Lyn Condie watched a sister she loved die by suicide, and she lives with lupus herself. She found hope in a woman from the New Testament whose issue of blood lasted 13 years long. In this episode of Why We Believe, Ganel-Lyn shares why today is not forever, why mental health needs real help and real hope, and how one quiet reminder that you are loved can keep a soul reaching for Christ. Stay with us for this episode as we talk honestly about mental health, suicide, and hope in Jesus Christ. Welcome to the Why We Believe show, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share their inspiring stories of faith and conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Why We Believe show. Today, I'm joined by Ganel-Lyn Condie. Ganel is a mental health educator, author, and storyteller. She's written more than 20 books. She's given more than 2,000 keynotes. She inspires others to trust God through life's challenges, and today she shares why she believes. Thanks for joining us today, Ganel-Lyn.
It's so good to be with you, Nathan.
So can you start off by sharing with us something that most people don't know about you?
Well, Ganel-Lyn is, I think I'm the only one in the world, but Ganel is a Hebrew word that means garden of God. And I just learned that a couple of years ago when I was hosting a weekly podcast, and my co-host was a seminary teacher, and I knew it was Hebrew, but I had never identified like root word meaning.
Yeah.
And so I just recently did an Instagram post explaining how to say my name because it scares people, and it almost prevented my husband and I getting married because he couldn't figure out how to ask me out. And that delayed our dating by a year, literally.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah. So we were friends for that whole year, but yeah, that's a whole nother story for another episode. So, and then I raised pigs growing up. So a lot of people don't know that about me either. So
I love it. I think we've got to hear that story. Tell us the story about you and your husband.
Well, he was my family home evening brother, and he was in charge of our first family home evening, home from his mission, super shy. I've never been shy in my life. And he borrowed the blender we were going to make smoothies for the activity. And he never gave my blender back. And he told me later it was because he was trying to figure out a creative way to ask me out, but couldn't say my name. And then through us becoming, just friends, he realized I had a boyfriend back at home. And so fast forward, we were friends for that whole year. He actually dated my roommate that year. Her name was Amy, which was much easier to say. But Amy had a missionary. So Amy married her missionary. And the next year in college, my really good friend was still my really good friend. And I always say friendship and faith are a really good foundation for marriage.
Agreed. Especially when you have a year to build on it without all the physical stuff.
Yeah. Once we were married, I said, don't act shocked by my crazy. I showed you all my crazy when we were just friends. So
it's good to have friends that see our crazy and still love us.
Yes.
Okay. So you are an author of many different books. You have another book that's very popular called The Stewardship Principle, and you mentioned the word stewardship. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book, the principles behind it, and maybe a key story?
Yeah, it's a principle that I learned about 10 years ago, and I had been reading just this workbook, and I thought in my mind, when you learn a principle that is so life-changing, in my mind, it was like a whole chapter of this workbook I was reading. And when I went back to write this book and I found that old workbook, it was one sentence. It wasn't even a paragraph. It wasn't even a chapter of any sort. And Elder Uchtdorf I guess he's President Uchtdorf again. President Uchtdorf in the last General Conference talked about the parable of the talents, and he used the word stewardship. And I'm not going to take credit, but I had a chance to give him a copy of that book. But I start out the stewardship principle that I wrote a couple of years ago with the parable of the talents. And ownership is kind of the buzzword, especially like in corporate coaching and speaking, that like take ownership of your life. Stewardship is the opposite. And I make the case that all of us are called to be stewards. We don't really own anything. So our health, our careers, our kids, our marriage, our unemployment, our anxiety, our eating disorder, our depression, our bills, our raise, all the things are stewardships, and we don't own anything. And when I got ready to finally write it, I had been practicing this principle for 10 years. And it really, I think specifically if you're a parent, it transforms how you parent. And if you think about how God parents us, he doesn't take ownership of our decisions. He values agency, but he trusts us with sometimes really fun stewardships and sometimes really hard stewardships. And sometimes, you know, it's easy to look around in your neighborhood and think all the cool, fun, great blessings are coming to your neighbor. And you're the one going through a cancer diagnosis, or your dog just died, or your husband just left you, or whatever it is. And when I studied the talents, the parable of the talents, I realized that maybe the servant that buried the one had been entrusted with something embarrassing. Maybe they had
Interesting.
been entrusted with addiction or a learning disability or something that didn't seem fun and beautiful and wonderful. And that's why they buried it. It wasn't because they were lazy or they didn't want to work. And so I start out the book, and then each chapter is kind of correlating stewardships. It could have been a much bigger book, but I wanted it small enough that the voice of an owner versus the voice of a steward is how I end each chapter. And so I talk about relationships and education, and I'm married to an amazing man that deals with ADD, and those, in my mind, it changes the value. It's not good and bad. It's not God is blessing you with something or not. He's entrusting us to be the servants and stewards in our lives. And the opposite of that is when we go into comparisons or ownership, especially when you're a parent and your kids grow up. I have adult kids now. It's so easy to slip into this ownership mindset where their choices reflect on who you are instead of seeing that you're a steward in their lives. So if you're a parent, I can explain it easily, and if I'm in a faith environment, I can talk about God. But if you study the Stoics, you can see where the Stoics teach this principle as well of not taking ownership. Or if you look at Buddhist teaching of like a detachment of an outcome and just being very present. And what I really try to share in this book is when you live as a steward with a stewardship mindset, the stress comes down and the trust with God increases. And you will be inspired instead of going to Sunday school and thinking you have to navigate everything in your life the way your neighbor is or who's sitting next to you. I think it also opens the door for God to inspire you. So those that follow me and have read my books know I always talk about mental health. And I think especially if you have a loved one or you yourself deal with a mental health stewardship, do you see how just like framing it that way changes the heaviness of it? It doesn't mean it's like Disneyland, but it requires us to have faith and trust and seek for inspiration on how to take care of that thing God has entrusted us with.
So when you mentioned stewardship earlier in this episode, you talked about your lupus. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your story with lupus and how lupus is a stewardship for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's also, if you deal with chronic illness, it's a really good way to teach this principle because, I try to move my body and take vitamins and eat well and get enough sleep and get massages. But even if I do all of that, I'm not going to be symptom free.
Right.
I'm dealing with some pretty severe arthritis in my hands today, and I'm an author, right? Like it's a pretty big deal for me to have my hands hurt. And so when I was first diagnosed, we were newly married. We didn't have children yet. We were told I had 10 years to live and we would never have kids. And so becoming a mom is a really sacred stewardship for me. But my lupus influenced how I could be a mom. Like I had to choose what I said yes to and no to every single day as a mom just based on my health. And so when I see my friends training for a marathon, that's not how I steward over my body.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible. But I also don't go to the gym, which is technically in my basement. So I don't go down the stairs to my basement to my home gym, treating my body like exercise is gonna fix. It's one way in which I care for my body because I'm a steward over my body. And so often in our culture, in the church and out of the church in the world, we think there's ownership of our bodies. Like somehow we can, not age and not hurt and magically make everything a translated being, and we're not that yet. We are living a very mortal experience. And so each day, pain is part of my mortal experience. And I don't expect to have healing, but as President Johnson taught, I do experience wholeness. I still have symptoms. I still have pain. When she gave that talk, she went on on Instagram after and gave the backstory of how she came up with that title and that topic. And it was her son has MS and her husband has severe back pain issues. And I thought, of course, she wrote a talk about healing versus wholeness with people she loves that are navigating chronic illness. And but I always like to say is maybe your lupus isn't lupus. Maybe your lupus or your issue of blood is depression or other things, anxiety. And so when I see my body as a steward, then I care for it differently and I get less frustrated. It doesn't mean I don't get frustrated, but I do things as an offering to my health and my body and care. I give watch care over my body. I don't get to control. And a chronic illness teaches you that pretty fast.
I love it. We don't have to be the owner. We don't have to take ownership. We can trust God. We can allow the outcome to happen, but we still take responsibility to be responsible with our healthcare, to
Yeah.
make careful
To show
decision
up.
makings. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I love it. I keep looking at you and I keep thinking, I'm talking to Sandra Bullock. Has anyone ever told you that before?
Wow. I have not gotten that before, but I will take it. Especially my birthday's on Sunday. I turned 55. I'll take it, Sandra.
You've written another book called You Are Magnificent. Can you tell us a little bit about the story behind that?
So the full title is You Are More Than Enough, You Are Magnificent. And the cover is a Brian Kirshnick painting he hadn't given permission for it to be a book cover, but it's a famous painting of a woman sitting, and then it's like angels are coming down onto her head, floating above her. And that's how it felt to write the book. And so I mapped it out, and basically the premise was really that we are enough with God. So each chapter is, do you have enough time? Do you have enough faith? Do you have enough beauty? And the way I write is once God gives me an idea, so it has to come first from him, or else I can't do the wrestle of the writing. It's just too much. It's too hard. Then I brainstorm in my journal, like principles I want to share. And then I map it out. And I don't know if you know this or your viewers know this. There's poster-sized sticky notes.
I have not seen those before, but those sound really cool.
Yeah. So I usually, if I'm writing, you'll know it, because if I'm doing a podcast interview, there's usually I'm not writing right now, a poster size sticky note, and I map out each chapter. Well, I mapped out that book, and it was the summer, a couple years before COVID, where if you remember, every week the news was some headline of like eclipses and fires and crazy stuff. And I remember thinking, this is the craziest summer. This is the craziest time in
doomsday
history.
summer, apocalyptic summer. Yeah.
Yeah. And then COVID, everything from COVID on has been 10 times crazier. But at the time when I was writing it, I remember I had already scheduled. The other thing I do is once I brainstorm and map out my book, I put it on my calendar as an appointment. So I knew each week what topic I was going to be kind of wrestling with the Spirit about. And of course, and I write this in the book, that of course the week I'm writing about enough time, I didn't feel like I had enough time. And of course the week I wrote about beauty, I didn't feel beautiful. And so it's really a conversation about this enoughness that we run around thinking we never have enough of, instead of seeing that what if we have more than enough because of God? That math equation is enough always. And the body chapter for sure, the body beauty chapter for sure, is a love letter to my daughter, because I have a 22-year-old daughter that I really wanted her to grow up comfortable in her skin. And I remember at the time thinking, she was in Young Women's, and sometimes the Young Women leaders were talking negatively about their own bodies in front of her. And I write in the book pretty boldly, like, it's a rule in our house. You can't come in our house and talk badly about your body or food, because our bodies and food are not our enemy. And that's just one example from that book. I still hear from readers, even though it's how many years ago that when that book came out, where that was a foundational conversation with them about being more gentle and kind to themselves instead of this always fixing energy that we have.
One last book I'm going to ask you about.
Okay.
You wrote a book about the not so secret lives of real Mormon wives. Can you tell us about your faith journey, your faith story that you share in that book?
Yeah, it was a fun project that we only got controversy and kickback from members of our church that hadn't read it yet. It came out as a response to the conversation that is blown up in media about members of our faith. And Mormon in the title is in quotations because we know that's not the official title of our church, but it's what we're known about in the media. And the publisher came to me and 7 other women, so 8 of us are in this book. And the goal was to market it to non-LDS readers. So to the people that live in a small community in Nebraska and they don't have a Mormon friend, but they think they know what the members of our church are about because of a reality show, we wanted to show that out of these 8 women, we come from 4 different countries and we don't all look like blonde TikTok stars in Utah. You know, we have someone from Nigeria, someone from Taiwan, 2 women from Brazil, 1 mother with a Down syndrome son, a woman from the UK. And so I said yes quickly because I grew up in a very diverse, culturally diverse community in Northern California, north of Sacramento, south of Chico. So the Yuba Sutter Feather River Temple area is where I went to junior high and high school. And I was the token Mormon, right? Like there was no hate really, but there was misconceptions and questions. And so in that book, I tell the arc of my life of walking with Jesus. And I talk about at a very young age with parents that had divorced and remarried, realizing at age 8, I had a sense of God being bigger than me, but me being important to him, just walking home from school. And then I talk about moving to this small community north of Sacramento with a new stepdad and a weird name and being the only Mormon girl with homemade shorts, and I couldn't go to dances. And, you know, all the questions that came about, was I Amish? Was I Seventh-day Adventist? Was I Jehovah's Witness? Was I Buddhist? Was I, you know, could I wear makeup? Could I not dance? You know, did I believe in Christian? Was I a Christian because we worship Joseph Smith? All of those questions. And so I tell a story of one of my dearest friends that is still a dear friend is Catholic, and I was Mormon, and we were in a community that had a pretty good presence of a community church. And at lunch one day, our friend that was Lutheran brought a book of all the cults that her dad had this book, and Catholics and Mormons were both listed as cults. And we both went home crying. And I tell this story of going home crying, but what a gift it was for me to be the token Mormon and have to answer questions and have to explain my faith at a young age. And sometimes it was lonely, but to this day, I go to my high school reunions, because of social media, I'm still connected with my high school and junior high friends, and they are my super fans. They are big supporters of my books. They've all pre-ordered Sourdough and the Savior, and they cheer me on. When the Feather River Temple was being dedicated and it was open for an open house, the area authority invited me to bring 2 groups of my friends from junior high and high school through the temple.
Wow.
And it makes me cry. It's one of the most sacred memories of my life to sit in the celestial room with friends from junior high and high school that are not of my faith, that have known me a good chunk of my life, and have them understand my covenants and this temple. And my community that I grew up in were so excited about this temple. And all my friends, while it was being built, you know how long it takes sometimes to get a temple built, they would send me update pictures when they would drive by and they were going to Target, and they would say, look at your temple. They would think it's my temple, right? And so a lot of who I am is that I got to live in such a diverse community. And that wasn't always easy, but it allowed me to wrestle with my faith at a young age. And it also allowed me um, to understand people of other faiths. So I have a little side interfaith community that I do on social media, and I have one season of a podcast called the All Faith Keepers on my YouTube channel. And I love having interfaith conversations, and that started at a young age. I'm always curious about how other people live and believe and practice their faith. And when I learn how other people keep their faith, it inspires me to keep my faith. As Latter-day Saints, we sometimes think we have the toughest religion, right? We are a high, quote unquote, demand religion where we have to wear certain clothes and eat certain food and not eat certain food and pay tithing and go to church. We used to have to go to church for 3 hours, and now we go to church for 2 hours, and we go on missions for 18 months to 2 years. And yet, if you learn about other faiths, man, I've been given the chance to speak in the Middle East, talk about 5 times a day of prayer and fasting over Ramadan. And my Jewish friends, I've gone to synagogue, and I've learned so much about prayer and the Sabbath because of my Jewish friends. And so I'm really grateful to have grown up as the token Mormon. And I'm grateful for my community that helped celebrate my differences. When you're growing up, you don't want to be different. You don't want the weird name. You don't want to be the kid that is the only one that goes to that church, that weird church. But as you get older, hopefully I think we embrace our differences a little bit better, hopefully over time.
Yeah.
So that book really tells this arc of my life. And the cover we knew was going to be controversial, but we were trying to have it be noticeable so that readers would pick it up in Nebraska and get to know our faith through very different women's stories. We don't say anything negative about a reality show. We don't criticize anything out there. We just share our faith in a real way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that interfaith story and experience that you're telling. When I ran adoption.com for 20 years, and our largest client was Jewish. In fact, several of our largest clients were Jewish. And so we went to many Sabbath dinners with our clients and their families. And it was such a beautiful experience, watching a Jewish father, give that blessing to his daughter on, that's so much of our heritage in our faith, it definitely comes from those roots. And I think it's just so beautiful to participate in that as well.
Yes.
All right. Talk to me about one of the hardest things that's happened in your life and how your faith helped you get through it.
Well, I've hinted to it. One of the hardest times of my life was 12 years ago when my 40-year-old sister died by suicide. I grew up in a home where mental health was a struggle for a number of members of my family, but it had been a lifetime struggle for Meg. And I'm the oldest and I'm the big sister. And so that comes with the sense of we can fix and save and help everyone. I think oldest children out there can relate to that.
Yeah.
Part of our soul. And so I'd watch Meg do really well and then really struggle and then do really well and cycle in her life. And she was good at all the things I was not good at. She could dribble a basketball, and she loved a good road trip, and she loved me, and I was the big sister. And when she died, it was 9 months before I even knew my first book was going to be published. And I had written the manuscript and submitted it. And 6 weeks after she died, I found out that they were going to publish it. And I rewrote it. My first book, I Can Do Hard Things with God, shares Meg's story. And I didn't think there would be 19 more books after that. But, her death, my brother found her on my mom's birthday. And there's nothing about suicide that you can retell it in a way that makes it better or easier or happier. It's a very unique kind of grief. I have 2 sisters that have died. I had a sister die when I was 10 and she was 2 years old. And so I have 2 sisters that are buried by each other.
So sorry.
Yeah. So suicide grief, I always say, is a different kind of grief. And you and I were talking before we started taping. I've spoken all over the world, and there's not a group I've spoken to where they don't either struggle with mental health, or someone they love struggles with mental health, or they've lost someone to suicide. So that's everyone on the planet, right? That's all of us. And I remember the days after Meg was found. I was trying to write her obituary and plan the funeral and be a mom and not sleep and grieve. And I kept thinking, where has God already taught us about mental health? And especially in the last days where I think we're living prophecy. When people ask me about the statistics of suicide and depression and anxiety, I think the scriptures warned us that in the last days, the hearts of men and women will fail them. And I think it feels like that sometimes,
Yeah, that's a
right?
good way to describe it.
Yeah. And I also believe in our faith. I believe in Meg's eternal progression. So as I've worked and consulted with organizations, including the church, on their suicide prevention site, which I would highly recommend going to it. There's something about this life that is such a beautiful gift because we have physical bodies that are a glory that the adversary doesn't have. But we also believe in eternal progression. And I know that Meg would share with your audience to stay in your body. And so I feel like she's my mission companion and I tell her story all the time. And it's because suicide is one decision, but it changes your other choices. And God honors our agency. And so when I was grieving that first week or two and I was just in a fog, I remember going to the scriptures and thinking, where did God already talk about someone that had spent their lifetime fighting this? Stewardship. And I came to the woman with the issue of blood, which I'm wearing a sweatshirt that has that story on it. I finally found one that I liked, and I like to wear it because it's the story that is kind of an anchor for my faith. She had 13 years of struggling with something, and it says in the scriptures that every time she tried something to get better, she got worse. And I like to hypothesize when I meet her one day, I'm going to hear all the stories of how her neighbors would get up in testimony meeting and tell about their testimonies of that diet, that medicine, that doctor, that exercise program that cured them of that exact thing that she was fasting and praying and going to doctors for and not getting better. And so in that moment, I had this awareness that Meg was tired. You know, when she died by suicide, she was tired, and God understands what she was wrestling with and feeling and fighting. But the story of the woman with the issue of blood to me is an invitation of reaching and a hope, of trying one more plan B. I talk about it in my Hope Works talk, and you can see a picture of Meg in that talk. I'm wearing a green dress, so sometimes people go, are you the green dress TED Talk lady? Which is code for the Hope Works talk, that the church used to do that series. And I just envision that this woman with the issue of blood, her being out in a community of people when she had a thing that made her, as we were talking about in the Jewish culture, have to be separated. We can all relate to some issue of blood that makes us mentally and emotionally and spiritually feel separate from others. And for those that are listening to this that deal with mental health struggles, that is a really big separator at times. It can feel like a wall between you and God, to feeling the spirit, to connecting with your family, to being in a community, to even going to church. And so as I read that story in the scriptures, I felt God reminding me that he knows those 13 years of struggle and the lifetime struggle of Meg. And the invitation from that moment on was, in some way, I didn't know there would be so many books and opportunities to speak and podcast hosting and all of those things at the time. I was just grieving, to keep reaching. And so I always squeeze in some mental health when I talk, because I don't believe that if you're a person of faith, it doesn't mean you don't need to take care of your stewardship of your mental health. You don't pray it away. You don't scripture read it away. You don't go to the temple enough and it goes away. You don't go to the church and serve in 15 callings and then your depression and anxiety and OCD will go away. Some of us are asked to navigate that throughout a lifetime. Some, like Elder Holland, who we just said goodbye to, so boldly and brilliantly started this conversation from the general conference pulpit. Some of us will have it for seasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's an opportunity and invitation to keep reaching for the Savior. And then my last point on that is, what the woman teaches us in this story is that it was the hem or the thread of his hem that she touched. And in that moment, he said to her, woman, thy faith hath made thee whole. And I'm astounded by that, because her faith was 13 years of trying stuff and it not working out. Her faith wasn't, I fasted and prayed, went to one doctor, and I'm better now. So what the Lord was saying to her, it was your 13 years of it not working out that has caused your healing. That's crazy to me. That's crazy to me, to think that our faith is literally it not working out. And that's what helped her become whole while she waited for the healing.
I love.
And so I just want to invite any of your listeners that are just like, I am done. I have tried 50 plan Bs. I'm on plan Z, and the world would be better without me. My life isn't better without Meg.
Yeah. I had a business partner who called me one Sunday, and I was getting ready for church, and he just said, "Nathan, I'm going to church today. I'm going to confirm my daughter who was baptized yesterday, and then I'm going to kill myself."
So sorry.
Yeah. And I called a couple of friends. He was down in Arizona and I was up in Idaho, and I just said, "Well, I'm going to be on the first flight. Just stay in that church. Don't leave that church." I had a couple of friends that were shared friends, family members who went and were with him. I got down there and I spent 5 days with him, and I would sleep on the couch and he would sleep on the floor. And finally went home, and 5 days later he did kill himself.
I'm so sorry.
And 2 apostles went to his funeral and spoke at his funeral. And there's a couple of things that stood out to me from that experience that have resonated with me. I used to live in Spanish Fork, Utah, and we used to live in this neighborhood, and there was a river along the side of our neighborhood, and right on the other side of the river was this sports park with all of these ball fields, and there was this beautiful big bridge that went from our neighborhood over that river to that sports park. And that bridge was really strong. It was very well made, very sturdy. You could probably put 50, maybe even 100 people on that bridge, and it would be just fine. But if I took a tank and I drove a tank over that bridge, it would collapse, right? And we all have a limit. We all have a weight limit on our bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Every single person on earth, no matter how strong they are, how spiritual they are, we all have a weight limit on our bridge. And we've got to be careful when we are exceeding the weight limit on our bridge. We can't drive tanks over our bridges. And we've got to have people in our lives that when we've got a tank on our bridge, they can help us get weight off of our bridge. We've got to have those relationships that we're watching for people in our lives, that when they have tanks on their bridges, that they can ask for help. They can say it's too heavy. And when that happens, we got to do everything we can to get that weight off of their bridge. And I know people commit suicide for lots of different reasons, but I'll add my witness to yours, that this world is not a better place because Will Carden is gone.
Mm-hmm.
The world would be a much better place if he was here. There's many people that miss him. Much good that he could do. And I know he felt that way. And I know for him, he didn't feel there were answers and solutions. But I don't know. And I guess the other point that really stood out was when one of the apostles spoke there at that funeral. He said, these mental health issues are real health issues. This isn't just in your head. This isn't something you can
Totally.
just tough out. You know,
Yep.
if somebody you loved broke their leg, you wouldn't just say tough it out, right? Just, you know, be strong. You take them to the hospital and you get a cast on their leg and you get them the medical help that they needed.
And I think Nathan, it's really important when we talk about mental health, because it's the work that I have been doing now for 12 years, that the woman with the issue of blood, it was a real issue, right? No one was thinking that she was faking that or that it wasn't real. And I often get asked, like, well, what if someone's just trying to get attention? And I just say, well, regardless,
Doesn't
if they're
matter.
saying what
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, that means there's a problem. And I would say too, mental health is complex. When it comes to your friend, mental health issues with middle-aged men is the top demographic of those dying by suicide. And we don't always give language to men around these feelings and these struggles. And I think we're doing better than since Meg died. We have had more conversations and there's more visibility and normalization around getting help and different tools that are now available. But I would just say there's not a one magic thing that's going to fix all the things. We're living in a heavy world and it's the last days.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to have complex conversations and have a really big toolbox.
That's right.
Because some days, even in my own mental health, Nathan, I dig in the toolbox and that screwdriver doesn't fit and that hammer doesn't work and that wrench doesn't work and I have to dig and dig. And that's the story of the woman with the issue of blood. She had a big toolbox that she had filled with a lot of things. What made her try one more thing to reach for the Savior? She didn't go to Google and see a review that said 5-star review for Jesus and his miracles. She had to use all of her faith and all of her courage while also realizing that she had evidence of it not working. How many times did your friend and my sister try that one more thing? And
Yeah.
like you said, the Lord understands the dynamics of those moments of exhaustion and giving up. But I hope and pray that people of faith also talk about mental health in a different way than we used to.
Yeah.
That it's not an either or.
Yeah. And no matter what, we can't judge them, right?
Totally. Yeah, teenagers, like we had a suicide in our stake last year, and I was called in kind of as an emergency response for the community to come to a special fireside with parents and kids. And it was the happy kid, right? So for teenagers, their brains aren't fully developed. So they have a thought of self harm, and 15 minutes later, they're going to have a different thought. That's brain development, right? So you can see why when we have mental health conversations, fathers, when you come home and say, I went to therapy today and it was awesome, what a great gift to give your kids. What a great gift of examples of getting, as Neil A. Maxwell taught, outside auditors to help you. We need outside auditors that are going to help us check the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves. And traditional talk therapy is not the only kind of therapy out there.
Yeah.
And so teenagers, I always say, teenagers, if you have a thought of self-harm, your brain is going to change a thought in 15 minutes, right? That's a thought that should signal to you, I've got to go get a helper, because that thought is not coming from the right place. That's coming from, you haven't had a life experience yet.
Yeah.
Men, it's a different thing. Postpartum moms, it's another thing. 70, 80-year-old women that live alone that's another issue. So we have to understand that we're having such complex mortal experiences and the Lord is aware of all of it. All of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that experience, Ganel-Lyn.
You're welcome. And thanks for telling me about your friend. And I definitely feel like Meg is my mission companion. And so I get to share her story a lot. And I have thousands of letters from people that Meg has helped.
Yeah.
And so even if we just help one person, this whole podcast will be worth it.
Yeah, that's right. If you could share one last final comment related to this topic for someone that's in that spot and is maybe having those thoughts, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say again, stay in your body. So that mortal body you've been given is flawed. Every single mortal body on the planet has a flaw. And right now, that thought is often sounds something along the lines of the world will be better without me, and it's not going to get better.
Yep. That's what I heard from my friend too. Almost identical
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. And so I would just say today, I know it's hard to believe, but today is not your forever. And I can tell you through a really sacred experience that I'll just reference it. I won't tell you the details after Meg died, that she knows she made a mistake. So there was some research done with people that jump off the Golden Gate Bridge to try to take their life. And the majority of people that do that die. But there are a small percentage of people that jump off the bridge that survive it. And 90% of those that jump that survive. So that's still a very small, don't like test this theory,
Yeah.
anybody that's listening. 90% of those that jumped and survived report they knew the minute they jumped, they made a mistake. And so friends of mine that are therapists that I refer to that I've grown to work with and respect have said that, at certain times with clients when they can't get out of that, death is the only option to take care of my pain thinking. The therapist friends of mine will say, well, I won't be there tomorrow if you wake up wherever you are going. You can't schedule a therapy appointment after you've made that decision. And that may sound a little abrupt and bold, but the truth is suicide is a response to pain and exhaustion. And so when we can redefine what do we need for support to use your analogy of the bridge, lessen the weight so you can do one more day until the Savior walks down your street and you can touch his robe, do that.
That's right.
Because especially people of our faith believe this spirit stays with us. So Meg's still working on her depression and anxiety. And I'm not saying there's not a physical component to that. I'm saying that her spirit is still having to learn the lessons it needs to learn. And these bodies help us learn those lessons faster.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a time in your life where you first remember feeling that this is really true? Jesus Christ really lives.
Oh, so many times. So many times. I mean, even after Meg died, the worst nightmares of my life were real. The grief was real. I was raising a teenager and I had a young daughter and we went through multiple unemployments and I've done years of chemotherapy with a heart condition that goes with my lupus. And I remember pleading in my closet at one season of my life when I was just so worried about one of my kids. And driving to the temple that week, which I do on a regular basis. And I walked into the temple just heavy-hearted. And I did initiatories that day. I didn't see anyone in the temple that day that I knew, no friends or stake members or ward members. And I didn't walk out of the temple feeling great. I didn't go into the temple, do the initiatories, come back out skipping. I cried through most of that in initiatory session and it didn't feel like I got any big revelation or answers or relief. But as I approached my car, I saw a green sticky note on the window and it said, "You are loved." And I looked around thinking, well, maybe a young women's group had come and put sticky notes on everybody's car. And my car was the only car that had a sticky note. And I had not run into anyone that knew me that day in the temple. And for many years, I would keep a green sticky note pad in my car. And when I went to the temple, I would put them on a few cars. I should probably start that again. I did it for many years. But I still have that green sticky note in my study journal. And every year I create a new study journal for the year where I write a gratitude list, where I write personal revelation, where I study the Book of Mormon, where I write about going to the temple, or if I get a priesthood blessing, it has my patriarchal blessing in that journal. It has my husband's and my kids. And I move the green sticky note every year to the new journal. And it's a reminder that God is aware of me. I didn't have a removal of my burdens. There wasn't some huge miracle in my child's life. That child is still struggling with things. But it was a reminder God was aware of me. And so I hope if one listener feels that witness because they can believe Nathan and Ganel-Lyn, but they can't maybe feel it for themselves. That day, God had to get a sticky note on my car. I wasn't going to come home, say a prayer, and feel it. I had to have a sticky note, literally saying it. And so I hope this podcast is a green sticky note.
Ganel-Lyn, in conclusion, why do you believe?
Well, there's a lot of good brain science about faith and prayer and what it does to the brain. So if you're science-based and you're just trying to find evidence of faith, there's a lot of good experts smarter than me to tell you why praying on a regular basis and having faith is just good for you. But I believe, like Albert Einstein said, it's just too much evidence that it's a miracle. And the miracle is that God is allowing the agency of his children to play out, and that means the news headlines right now are hard. But I believe there's something bigger than me. And I don't think of it in such an abstract way. I believe in a heavenly mother and father that literally know me. And I believe in a brother that has felt everything I've felt. So when I kneel in prayer each night to talk to our dad, my brother's with me. And the Holy Ghost is there as the fuel and the language to have the conversation. But sometimes I don't have the words. So I believe because I have to believe. The other option isn't an option for me. I often have people that have known me and know my stories in detail say, why are you not a heroin addict or a prostitute? Given some of my situations of life that I'm sometimes sensitive about telling details to, because some of those people are still alive that are involved in that. And I just say, I don't know another way to do it without God. And that doesn't mean going to church is always easy. It doesn't mean living my covenants is always easy, but I believe and witness that my covenants bind me to God.
Yeah.
And he is a God that keeps his promises. And as the late Elder Holland said, which is weird to say late, God keeps his promises in this life and in the next.
Yeah.
So sometimes in this life, it's not going to show up. But I believe in a God that keeps his promises. That's why I believe.
Yeah. And there's a lot of scary things in the world today, like we alluded to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scary things that happen in our lives, like we've talked about today. But the scariest thing for me is if I'm not doing it with God. If I'm ever in a place where I don't have God with me and I'm trying to do it myself, there's nothing more scary than that. This is real, and he loves us, and he will help us through this if we let him, if we do it with God.
Keep reaching for him. Even the hem of his robe, the thread of a hem of a robe is enough.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for being with us today and sharing your stories of faith and testimony.
Thanks, Nathan, for having me.
And here are some of my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, stewardship perspective on life, health, and family reduces anxiety and increases trust in God. Number 2, chronic struggle can become a setting for deep discipleship instead of a measure of spiritual failure. Number 3, mental and emotional wellness improves when spiritual practices are combined with wise professional support. Number 4, honest conversations about pain, loss, and suicide can open doors for healing within families and wards. And finally, number 5, repeatedly turning towards Christ, even in the darkest seasons, allows his love to reach and sustain the soul. Ganel-Lyn's experience highlighted the reality of mental health struggles and the hope that comes through Jesus Christ. If this episode resonated with you, please share it. You can leave a rating and a review for Why We Believe. You can also comment with the insight or moment that resonated with you. And please don't forget to go to whywebelieve.com, where you can download the free ebook that we have to help strengthen your own testimony of Jesus Christ.